Texas always brags about its cowboy image. You see, here in Texas, we don't go for that liberal stuff. All I can say is, thank God I live in Oklahoma, where Texas is just a buffer state between common sense and wokeism. Today, Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas is going to avail the Trump assassination attempt to engage in political grandstanding that is quite loco. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With cold, blunt analysis cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnny Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's time for the Johnny Walker Dread Show.
Miss Crockett from Texas.
Thank you so much,
From Texas. Don't forget that.
Mr. Chair. And let me just pick up where my colleague from Tennessee left off. Director Cheatle, was the incident on July 13th due to DEI, or rather systemic failures in communication and potentially safety protocols?
The incident on the 13th has nothing to do with DEI. The incident on the 13th has to do with a failure or a gap either in planning or communication.
Thank you so much.
This is like one of those multiple choice questions, right? Where one answer has 3 letters in it and the other one has this long, complex response. Gee, I wonder which one you should choose. I love the fallacy of limited options. I guess this settles it. For those of you blaming DEI for the downgrading of standards at the U.S. Secret Service, I'll just have you know that the director just put that to bed. And while I don't believe that Crockett is a plant, this is the kind of question that I would give her to ask me if I'm a DEI hire. And by the way, this was probably the only question asked of Cheatle throughout the entire hearings for which she was thanked.
In fact, I have a few articles that I will enter into the record once I wrap up that actually acknowledge a number of women specifically for their valor in their service, whether it's been in various levels of law enforcement.
Her articles are worthless. No one is saying that women have not done courageous things throughout history. The issue with DEI is whether the focus on hiring women at the expense of others poses a drop in standards. No one thinks that Filipinos can't serve with valor. In fact, the Japanese can tell you all day about their bravery. But if you push an artificial quota of 30% of all Secret Service employees must be Filipinos, you're going to diminish the quality of your workforce because you'll need to turn down many who are more qualified to meet your hiring goals. This is just a simple fact of life that the pushers of DEI don't seem to understand.
But, you know, I want to stick here for just a second, because earlier you had a conversation in which there was a discussion about training. And I want to talk about training, and I want to talk about the fact that there's been a little bit of dancing around as it relates to this being a suspicious person and this being a situation that was perceived to be a threat. And it seems as if there's a different analysis that takes place. One of my questions has to do with if you have any bias training that your officers undergo. And the reason that I ask that, because as a civil rights lawyer, I have learned so many times in having to deal with law enforcement that there usually is not a perception of a threat when it is a young white male, even if they are carrying a long gun. Yet a lot of times, at least in this country, when it comes to law enforcement, there is a perceived threat just by somebody having a little bit more melanin in their skin. So I'm curious to know, because a lot of times, one of the things that we have consistently pushed for on my side of things, and when I say my side, is once we are looking at a tragedy in which law enforcement made an error, is the bias training and whether or not our officers are getting it.
Hey, lady, shut up!
So I'm curious to know, in some of the training that you talk about that is part of your budget, has bias training been part of that?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
You could have just asked her. You didn't have to go through all that. Do you have bias training for all of your employees? Yes, we do. That would have been the end of it. This is Cheatle's dream interrogator. If Kimberly could have this nut ask questions all day, she'd line up for it. She spends 10 minutes for every 30 seconds grandstanding on her soapbox, telling everybody what the laws of this country should be. And yeah, you heard, another civil rights lawyer who's Loco. I've been telling everyone that there aren't enough civil rights violations to satisfy the hordes of civil rights lawyers that our colleges are churning out. So they end up ambulance chasing, creating civil rights violations out of thin air, becoming commentators on social media platforms, or worst of all, politicians. And so the race grifting begins. A white dude shoots a white right-wing politician while shooting 3 other white people, and it's all about race?
Hi, I'm the most local person in here.
Thank you. I know that today is a rough day, and on that day in Pennsylvania, it was a rough day. And the reality is that
Yeah, it was a rough day. Yep. For Trump, it was a rough day. For the man that died and the 2 others that were wounded, it was a rough day. But you see, she's not talking about how rough it was on those people. No. When she says it was a rough day, she's talking about the reputation of DEI. That is what she cares about. You really think she cares about Trump or those MAGA attendees? So again, this is all about grandstanding. She's not using her time to question the director to get to the bottom of things. She's using her time to push her agendas. For example, the director mentioned that the failures were caused by communication problems. So Crockett naturally started questioning the director on what communication problems surfaced that allowed a kid to almost kill a presidential candidate, right? No. In fact, you're going to find out that she's going to spend her time taking aim at what she thinks is the real culprit, permitless carry. Don't believe me? Hang on. Oh, and I should mention, if this woman here found out behind the scenes that DEI played a role in allowing the shootings to happen, how hard would she be begging the director to lay out all the cards?
I understand it, and you may or may not know the answer to this question. In the space in which this event took place, it was an open carry space. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So,
By the way, I thought that was rather surprising. I thought that events that were controlled by the Secret Service, that you weren't allowed to have open carry guns. But I don't know. I did a quick Google search and didn't see anything. So let me know if you really do know the answer to that. It doesn't matter. Who in here really thinks that Pennsylvania's permitless carry law had any impact on what took place?
I hail from the state of Texas, and interestingly enough, I was serving in the state house right after there was a mass shooting in El Paso. We had an opportunity to do right by our citizens in Texas, but we did not. Instead, they passed permitless carry. And what my colleagues kept trying to get you to answer, because we want to come up with solutions, we don't want to keep pointing the finger. And right now, you've got a bunch of fingers that are pointed at you. But our job is to solve problems for the American people. And to be perfectly honest, the numbers are clear. I think almost every major law enforcement agency come forward and say that they were against permitless carry because they said that their jobs would be made more difficult. Unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in the state of Texas decided that they would ignore those warnings, and they passed the law instead. And right after they passed that law, we ended up with Uvalde. And
Well, are we going to bellyache to Congress about a state law that you didn't like? I mean, who cares? Yeah, Texas passed permitless carry. You didn't like it. Take your issue up with the Texas State House. This is not an issue for the U.S. Congress. This is supposed to be an investigation into the Trump assassination. And you're hijacking it to complain about a permitless carry law in Texas.
I'm crazy. I'm the local one.
And by the way, now who's going to bother telling her that illegal possession of a firearm was the last thing on Crooks's mind?
We heard the stories of those officers that were scared to go in and save those babies because of the firearm in which that, in that case, 18-year-old had in his hands. They also were given an opportunity to say, hey, raise the age and make it to where at least you have to be 21 before you can possess this type of weapon.
Why are you telling this to the director? She's there to answer questions about her screw-ups as director. And you're lecturing her on why permitless carry in Texas is bad.
That was local, but not in an entertaining way.
What is she supposed to do with this? But again, this is about grandstanding. She's campaigning.
And they chose not to. And we have the facts. It shows, and I'll enter this into the record as well if there is no objection, deaths from firearms keep climbing in Texas decades after lawmakers began weakening gun regulations. That is from the Texas Tribune.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's great. You're actually going to enter into the record a newspaper article on Texas's gun laws from a left-wing propaganda outlet, the Texas Tribune. I am sure those congressmen from Hawaii and Idaho will find it riveting. So let me ask you, what did she ask the director that helped or tried to help get to the bottom of things as far as the assassination attempt goes? And the answer, of course, is nothing.
The last thing that I'm just going to make a point of saying is that we all care about this issue because we know that there has been a spike in violence, political violence in this country. Are you aware of the fact that the numbers are higher right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she's the director of the Secret Service. She probably knows that. Boy, these are really tough questions. The director is getting hammered. And you can look at the expression on Kimberly's face like, okay, whatever.
In addition to that, and I'm going to point a little blame at ourselves because right now you got all the fingers pointed at you. But
Now, remember, she said ourselves, right?
the reality is that we have a number of congressional members that are consistently engaging in violent rhetoric, and it needs to be toned down.
No, she didn't mean ourselves. She's talking about the others. And it needs to be toned down. Yeah. Yeah, tell that to Maxine Waters when she told everybody that they should confront MAGA people in restaurants and give them hell or something like that.
The reality is that people are listening and they're paying attention. But unfortunately, another thing that is happening because we're not getting answers from you today is the conspiracy theories. They have already began. Have you heard of any of the conspiracies?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Tough questions. Oh my God. Old Crockett is just slicing and dicing her way through Kimberly.
The problem with these conspiracies is that when people believe that, say, the president of the United States ordered a hit, or they believe it was an inside job, or whatever conspiracies they believe because they don't have any facts in front of them, that potentially incites the next level of violence at the next event in retaliation for this. So
in other words, the real problem is not so much that Trump was shot, it's the retaliation. I'm serious. That is what they're taking away from this. We're not worried about Republicans getting shot. We're worried about the Democrats that might get shot in retaliation. I mean, they're coming out and saying it. It's amazing.
we are only begging for your job as it relates to being the director, as well as the men and women that you are protecting as their director, that you keep them safe by making sure that the American people have the information that they need so that they can feel as if Secret Service is on the side of the American people. And ma'am, I don't doubt that Secret Service is on the side of the American people. But right now, so long as these conspiracy theories continue to fester, it is going to make your job that much harder. Thank you so much. And
Well, what is she supposed to say to that? Okay. Grandstanding. Get up there, yeah, while the other person just sits there and listens to it. It wasn't even a question. So what's the director supposed to do in response? Just sit there and listen to it. Okay, so we can all, I think, agree that Jasmine Crockett is a moron and quite loco. And I found this interesting little news item that I kind of find humorous. Hang on. So as you know, Jasmine Crockett is a lawyer, a civil rights lawyer. And in this magazine, they asked her, what made you decide to practice law? Now, we're not going to cover the first paragraph. Let's scroll down. In my junior year, I became the victim of a series of hate crimes, of myself along with a handful of other black students. My school didn't know what to do, and they brought in the Cochran firm. I think that's Johnny Cochran. And the lawyer that helped me became my instant shero. At that time, I was helpless and confused. She was able to calm me and walk me through the legal process. While we never figured out what happened, it was empowering to have her there. So she became a victim of a series of hate crimes, but they never figured out what happened. I knew you'd get a kick out of that. And with that, she becomes a loco lawyer.
With this bandana, I welcome you to the game.
Like my video and subscribe to my channel.